You know, it's a curious thing. Most people think that faith means believing in something. That to have faith, you must hold firmly to certain ideas, certain dogmas, certain statements about God, the universe, and your place in it. But I want to suggest to you that this is precisely not what faith is. In fact, the person who clings most tightly to belief may have the least faith of all. Faith is not clinging. It is not holding on. It is not gripping desperately to ideas like a man drowning, trying to clutch the water as if it were solid. Faith is letting go. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water. You trust yourself to it. You float because you relax. You let the water support you. And the moment you stiffen, the moment you panic and try to grasp it, you sink. So too with faith. Faith is a state of openness, of trust in the process of life itself, of being carried by something vast, something immeasurable, something you cannot grasp or even define. But this is a frightening prospect for many. The mind desires security, and belief provides that. Belief wraps reality into tidy packages, gives names to the nameless, explanations to the inexplicable. But true faith, the faith that the great mystics speak of, begins where belief ends. It arises when we surrender the need to define, to control, to explain, and instead rest in the infinite mystery of what is. And so, let us walk together into this mystery, not to accumulate more beliefs, but perhaps to finally let them go. You see, what we are speaking about here is not merely a set of ideas, not a philosophy to be adopted, or a system of doctrines to be believed in. It is rather an experience, or more precisely, experiencing. Faith is something that operates deep in your being, in your bones, as it were, not simply in your mind. It's not an opinion you hold. It's not a conclusion you've reached. It's a way of being, of relating to the world. And curiously, much of Western religion has inverted this. In many traditions, particularly Christianity as it developed, enormous emphasis has been placed on correct belief. Do you accept the right dogmas, the right doctrines? Are you saying the right words about God? Because you are saved, not by works, but by faith. Yet ironically, that faith has often been reduced to mere belief, the mental acceptance of certain statements as true. But belief, in this sense, is fragile. It must be defended. It is always in danger of being contradicted, disproven, challenged. That is why belief often leads to fanaticism. Because it clings so tightly to its ideas, it fears anything that might threaten them. Faith, on the other hand, needs no defense. The one who truly has faith can afford to be open, flexible, even playful, because they trust the underlying process of life itself, without needing to seize it in the net of concepts. To have faith is like falling backwards into infinite space, trusting that you will be caught, though you cannot see by whom or by what. Now, if faith is openness, if it is trust in the unfolding of life, then what about knowing God? That too has been gravely misunderstood. In many religious traditions, particularly in Christianity, they tell us that God can never truly be known, that the infinite cannot be grasped by the finite mind, that God, being ultimate, resists every attempt to capture him with thought. And yet, at the very same time, much energy has been spent debating what to believe about God. Endless arguments, councils, creeds, and declarations. Do you believe in the Trinity? Do you believe in the Incarnation? reincarnation? Do you believe in the virgin birth? But these are beliefs about God, not God. Very early on, the Christian church rejected the movement called Gnosticism, a path that emphasized gnosis, or direct experiential knowledge of the divine. The Gnostics spoke of three types of people: the pneumatic, the spiritual ones; the psychic, the soul-centered ones; and the highly the material ones concerned only with the world of things. Orthodox Christianity rejected this classification. Rightly so, perhaps, for spirit and matter need not be enemies. After all, the central miracle of Christianity is the incarnation, that God became flesh, the infinite took form, the divine entered the world of the material. As St. Athanasius said, God became man, that man might become God. And yet, you rarely hear that in church today. For many, the focus remains not on experiencing the divine directly, but on adhering to correct ideas about the divine. And this, you see, is the great tragedy of confusing belief with faith. In the mystical tradition, especially among Christian Neoplatonists, there is a beautiful paradox. The highest knowledge of God is a kind of unknowing. They called it agnosia, not ignorance, as we might assume, but a special kind of knowledge through unknowing. Dionysius the Areopagite, that mysterious figure of early Christian mysticism, taught that God is best known by stripping away all that we think we know. This is the path of negative theology, the via negativa. God is not one. Not even unity captures him. God is not spirit, not mind, not justice, not even love. For all these concepts fall short. The more you try to define God, the further away you move. For any concept, any image is less than God. If you see something and say, this is God, you have only seen a creature of God, an angel perhaps, but not God himself. The cloud of unknowing, as one medieval mystic called it, is where true faith lives. It is not a blankness. It is not a void. It is not the absence of thought in the sense of mere emptiness. No, it is a fullness too vast for any single thought to contain. And here the traditions of East and West meet, for the Hindus call this jnana, the same as gnosis. The sages of India speak of it as neti, neti, not this, stripping away all concepts until only the mystery remains. In unknowing, we fall back into the infinite, not grasping, but surrendering. Not seeing God as an object, but as the very ground of all seeing. You see, when you explore deeply enough, the boundaries between traditions begin to dissolve. The Christians speak of the cloud of unknowing. The Hindus say neti, neti, not this, not that. The Buddhists speak of sunyata, the great void, but all point toward the same mystery. The highest realization is not to escape the world, not to shut down the senses, not to sit in catatonic blankness. That is a profound misunderstanding. In some traditions, people imagine that enlightenment means sitting unmoving, deaf and blind to the world like a stone, as if ultimate wisdom were the absence of life itself. But no, the Chinese Zen master Huineng warned against this very error. To confuse emptiness with nothingness is to miss the point entirely. True emptiness, true sunyata, is not a void that excludes, but a space that includes all things without being stained by any of them. Space contains all stars, planets, and galaxies, yet remains perfectly empty. You cannot hammer a nail into space. You cannot spit on the sky and soil it. Your mind, your true nature, is like that space. It contains every thought, every feeling, every moment, but remains unstained. The Hindus call the ultimate state nirvikalpa samadhi, non-conceptual awareness. But this does not mean blankness. It means awareness, free from the chains of concepts, an openness so vast that nothing is excluded and nothing clings. This is not the emptiness of death. It is the fullness of life overflowing. And so we come to what may be the most beautiful paradox of all. The highest state of consciousness is not one that withdraws from life, but one that fully embraces it. If nirvana and samsara are truly one, as the Buddhists say, then the awakened one does not flee the world, but lives deeply within it. The Bodhisattva, the ideal figure of Mahayana Buddhism, is not wrapped in a trance, not hovering in some otherworldly bliss. No, he is here, fully present, fully engaged, moving through the world with the grace that comes from knowing there is nothing to fear. The spirit becomes flesh. The word becomes life. The infinite expresses itself through the finite. You see, if the highest reality were some exclusive state, some frozen, silent void, it would contradict itself. For what is truly infinite must leave nothing outside. The non-dual contains all opposites. It is not one, for one excludes many. It is not nothing, for nothing excludes something. It simply is boundless, measureless, whole. Like space, no edge, no outside, no division. You may even glimpse it in the curious shape of a Klein bottle, a three-dimensional Mobius strip whose inside is outside and whose outside is inside, a surface that transcends our usual categories of inner and outer. This is how reality truly is. Seamless, continuous, undivided. The highest realization is not to escape life, but to see that you were never separate from it at all. Now you might ask, if the awakened one lives fully in the world, why do we speak so often of meditation? Why retreat? Why sit? Why the discipline? The practice? Meditation, you see, is not the goal. It is a medicine, not a diet. When you wish to open a door, you may pick up a brick to knock, but you do not carry the brick into the house. When you wish to cross a river, you build a raft, but you do not haul the raft on your back once you've reached the other shore. And yet, many become attached to the practices themselves. They confuse the raft for the destination. They turn the doorway into a revolving door, endlessly circling, never passing through. They say, "What a marvelous experience this meditation is." They become fascinated by the spinning, by the discipline itself, forgetting entirely that the whole point was to walk through into life itself. Spiritual practice can become a subtle form of spiritual vanity, a kind of religious one-upmanship. I meditate longer than you. I am more disciplined than you. I have experienced higher states than you. Be very careful of this. The purpose of meditation is to prepare the mind to release its grasping, to see through the illusion of separation, and finally to drop even the meditation itself. The awakened one walks freely, neither clinging to practices nor rejecting them, for he has seen that all tools are temporary. What matters is not the method, but the surrender. And now we arrive at the delightful heart of the matter. True faith is not grim, not serious in the sense of rigid solemnity. It is not a heavy burden to carry It is rather a dance, a play, a cosmic joke of sorts. For you see, all the doctrines, all the beliefs, all the elaborate structures of theology, they are fingers pointing at the moon. And the tragedy is that people often stare at the finger, worship the finger, argue about the shape of the finger, and never see the moon. The one who truly has faith can laugh, because he knows deeply, viscerally, that he is not in control. He has let go of grasping. He falls backwards into infinite space, not knowing, not needing to know, but trusting utterly that the process of existence will catch him. In Zen they say, be kind to the crazy ones, for their souls are already with God. And perhaps in a certain sense, true faith is a kind of holy madness, the willingness to surrender control, to abandon certainty, to rejoice in not knowing. You see, there is a great secret game in spiritual circles, the game of seriousness, the game of importance, the game of being more enlightened than thou. A parasite is someone who keeps going through the revolving door, but only because someone else keeps giving it a push. But the one who walks right through, who leaves the door behind, who steps into the great mystery without the need to carry any tools, any labels, any beliefs, that one is free. That one is truly alive. And so, in the end, what is faith? It is not belief. It is not doctrine. It is not the fevered clinging to ideas that make us feel secure. Faith is surrender. It is the courage to release your grasp on life, to stop clutching, stop resisting, and simply allow. To trust the flow of existence the way you trust the water when you float, knowing it will carry you, though you cannot command it. To live in faith is to fall backwards into the arms of God. Arms you cannot see, cannot define, cannot control, but which you know are always there. It is to awaken in the morning with no guarantee, no certainty, no assurance of what tomorrow will bring, and yet to breathe, to smile, to walk forward, knowing that you are already home. The great mystery is not something to be solved, it is something to be lived. You do not solve music. You play it, you dance with it, and so it is with life. Faith is not about having the answers, it is about being at peace without them. In the words of an old Zen master, when you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. Above all, don't wobble. That is faith.